shoot around and come over here. And look at the side of this group. It shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. Hi, Aaron. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
You watch your crank.
Well, I may will come to a pen right now while he's starting, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3 more, 8, 2 more, 1 more, and work in front of the red curtain. Don't try to do it from the side. Just be impolite and elbow people butt in the way.
Get friendly, get close. Ready? 2
cycles. Yeah, that's what we do. While he's cranking it, I should explain that cranking is not until later. It takes practice. Okay, if you guys will shoe out, you'll get a chance to take pictures later. That's a chance.
Yeah, I never got my video.
Okay. Try to move out of the way as quickly as you can.
We're going around a circle. You get to see the front of it. I don't know if this will work.
7, 8, whatever. Over here, crowd. 9, 10.
For those that have already seen it, we'll just sort of cycle as quickly as we can this way. There's as much to see from the front as the back, so that's good to know as well.
All right, now it's 2 cycles.
What are you doing right now?
Pardon?
What are you thinking right now?
Values and logarithms. Ordinary logarithms, base 10 logarithms. What I was trying to explain is, as he's turning, okay, if you guys move out of the way as quickly as you can. As he's turning the crank, the load on him changes by as much as 40 pounds, but he has to turn it smoothly or the machine may jam. So he goes too fast, too low. Okay,
Thanks for jinxing it.
7,
Position there.
8, 9, 1 more. Well, then 1, anybody.
Or 2. It's okay.
All right, 2 of you. Go on. But shove people out here, please. Don't stand in the line. Try to get in front of the red curtain. Shorter people in front, whatever you have to do. Okay, go. Okay, shoe out as quickly as you can. 10 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
We will get to the explanation
more.
of what you just saw after you see them.
Yeah. So
Has everybody been back already?
We've been already.
Okay.
I need 4.
What?
I need to do 4. I'm trying to do the math. Unless you
Oh,
want to do some
oh,
more later.
no. Well, it doesn't really matter because I can't find the sheet for where we are. Maybe
No, I
we
put
go
it out.
beyond the
I put it
sheet.
in the. I searched for it all morning. It was all out of whack. I put it in the big folder with all the pictures and stuff. Let me do the 4 cycles while you're doing that, and then I'll find it if I need it.
Sorry, the folder with pictures just has pictures.
All right, I'll do that. You can talk. Yeah, I got it. I was looking at it on the last one.
Because I was searching for it, and we just didn't go beyond 1 point something. And
Yeah, it's 1, 2, 8.
yeah. Okay. If anybody has not been behind yet, hold up your hand. 3 people. Okay, go behind now. You'll have a chance to crack it some more, Eric. I just sent the stragglers behind.
Well, it's just an even number. All right, I'll come back and do this again.
I kind of searched too. I don't. You
no,
say you
I-
actually saw it.
I know I did, and I actually read off because I had to compare because they didn't finish the line
How it
last time.
went. Oh, is that it there?
No, no. I'll find it. I'll give you 5 more hours.
Whatever you need to get to a multiple.
So what equation are you calculating?
Well, it'll all be explained in the lecture.
Oh, sorry.
But the column I'm looking at is where we have the results. Yep, it's a 0 at the bottom. Okay, well, while I'm yakking away, you might look for it. Okay. Pick up some of my props and start explaining what's going on. I'll start with a brief biography of Charles Babbage and how he came to envision these machines. And that's all, and how they came to be built. Then I'll explain how the machine works, which is what it does and how it does it. Which leaves the question, why does it do it? And then I'll explain to the blackboard a little bit of arithmetic. Okay, so I'll start with Babbage. He was born in 1791, so he grew up in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, where everything was powered by steam. Steam pulled, locomotives pulled the trains, and steam powered the textile mills. And the word steam, it became a metaphor for mechanization. Next topic. Things that look like this. I see smiles and maybe some unhappy looks. And your experience in high school. Anyway, those tables are really important in almost anything technical that you're doing. But there was one particular activity that concerned the British government. Seafaring nation, they really were worried that a ship might go on the rocks because of a mistake in the tables that they used for navigation, celestial navigation, which are sort of trig tables mostly. Well, there were 3 sources of errors in those tables, which made them pretty poor. You found it? Oh. Was I blind or what?
It was all mixed up.
Anyway, 3 sources of error. First place, people did the arithmetic and they make mistakes. That's obvious. I'll jump ahead to the 3rd source. Then I'll talk about the source in the middle. The 3rd source is the printer, the guy setting the type. They're individual pieces of type. Now, he's looking at it. He's actually looking at a mirror image, but he's used to that. So if it's words and he misspells a word, he'll probably spot it. But these digits have no context. So we're certain the printer would make errors if he's setting type for a number of hours. Now, there's something in the middle. No one ever guesses it, so I've stopped asking people to try to guess it. The guys doing the arithmetic have worksheets of some sort. They can't give those to the printer. He won't know what to copy. They've got to inscribe the values to a separate piece of paper, which sounds pretty trivial. But think, if you did this for 8 straight hours, wouldn't you make a mistake, maybe skip a line? So 3 sources of error, the tables were bad. Now we get to a legend. There are 2 actual legends that in this talk. The first legend's theme is, if you read it in a book, it must be true. I read this in a book. The second legend is more like the grapevine. I heard it through the grapevine. Well, the first legend is that in 1831, now he's 30 years old, Babbage and an astronomer friend named John Herschel are comparing 2 versions of a table, same table, calling out the values. And whenever what these 2 guys call out disagree with each other, at least one of those tables is wrong. Well, The legend is that Babbage was so exasperated at one point that he just stood up and shouted, "I wish to God these tables had been executed by steam." 2 years later, he's figured out how to do it. Now, he has not invented a computer, not yet. What he has invented is a very sophisticated, permanently programmed kind of adding machine, which by some magic will evaluate things that look like this. Polynomials. Okay, now such polynomials, that's what people used. A polynomial can be tailored by using the proper coefficients to represent other functions, like trigonometric functions or logarithms, over limited ranges. That is, it'll be for, say, 7-place values, it'll be accurate within a certain range. You get out of that range, you got to tweak the polynomial to change its coefficients. Now, for the logarithm, it's particularly good. This machine can actually calculate 3,000 7-place logarithms before the polynomial is tweaked.
Did you bring out the formula that we're using for logs?
Yeah, I did. So anyway, this is a polynomial, but just to show you what we're doing with logarithms, the coefficients that go into that polynomial look something like this. Lots of digits. Now, so this machine evaluates polynomials. And the values show up in this column. And there are some magic numbers in the other columns, and I'll explain what's going on a bit later. But at any rate, what Babbage gets is a grant from the British Treasury of 17,000 pounds sterling, which is the equivalent of gazillions of dollars. He hires the best tool maker in the whole country, a guy named Joseph Clement. And they start building a machine. Now, they must have been incurable optimists who expected to, or maybe they expected to live forever. Because after 9 years of this making parts by hand for that machine, they only have enough parts to build a reduced working model. It doesn't go to the 7th power, which was what was of x, which was what was needed. It only goes up to the 5th power. It doesn't carry as many significant figures as were really needed to calculate 7-place values. And what is it? It's about so big square by so high. You may have seen it in that video. It lives in the London Science Museum. Babbage kept it in his home, and he used to demonstrate it at dinner parties and calculate logarithms. Only 5 places specifically calculated logarithms. So that is what they've accomplished after 9 years. On year 10, the whole project is over. It falls in a heap on the floor because of a disagreement. It seems that Babbage has the kind of personality, very charming. If you're his friend, you can do no wrong. But by God, you better not ever disagree with him about anything. Clement has a similar personality. They get into a disagreement. Babbage wants Clement to relocate his workshop closer to Babbage's home. This involves paying Clement some money. They disagree about how much money. At that point, the whole project is over. It's just done. The government's 17,000 pounds is just evaporated. Any parts that Clement has in his workshop, as far as he's concerned, they're scrap metal. They belong to him on the British property law. And that's the end of it. The trouble is that Babbage, at this point, has lost interest in this thing called the difference engine. The name will be explained later. Because he has come to a conclusion that he can make a machine which can do more. Now, before I talk about the machine, I want to say one thing. If your machine knows how to add, it also automatically knows how to subtract by something called complement arithmetic. I'll explain it very briefly. If you want to subtract 1 from a number, you can get the same result by adding a number which is all 9s. There will be a carry at the top which sort of goes off into outer space. If you want to subtract 2 from a number, just add a number which goes 9999999 and an 8 at the bottom, and so on. By the same argument, if you figured out how to multiply, it's pretty easy to divide. Well, he decides he can build a machine which will do all of those operations, which can store numbers in a number of places. How many? He changed his mind from time to time. We'll call them registers, which can obey instructions which come in on punched cards. Instructions of the sort, it would be several instructions to do it, but it would be of the sort, take this number and add it to that number and put the sum there. And the cards are not these things. They haven't been invented yet. Anyway, it would be invented in a different country. They're the cards of the Jacquard loom. This is a loom which can be programmed to weave pictures, patterns, anything you want. And the cards were about so long and so wide, inflexible, stiff cardboard. And at the ends of the cards, each card was connected to the next one by some threads or strings. So the cards could be laid out like a carpet, or they could be stacked up. And finally, there was an instruction which had the nature, however it was exactly formulated, it was the equivalent of, if one of these particular registers where we stored a number has 0, skip n cards, where n could be positive or negative, so you could skip forward or back. Well, if you look at that specification, that's a computer. It meets all the requirements of a computer. So nobody doubts that Babbage invented the computer. He never built it, but he called it the analytic engine, and he spends the rest of his life massaging it, changing it, improving it, playing with it, conceptually, on paper. However, 13 years into working on it, he realizes that he can build a difference engine with 1/3 the number of parts of his original design, a completely different design. The original machine was going to have 24, if built, would have 24,000 parts roughly. This has 8,000. And half of them are in this section here, which does the arithmetic. And half of them are in this very complicated, smaller thing, which does 2 things. Just for checking its behavior, it'll print on the results on this tape. You won't get to see that because we don't put ink on the roller. The cleanup will take too long. The other thing is, and that's the important thing, if there's plaster of Paris in this tray, soft plaster of Paris, it'll impress a mold. And when the plaster hardens, you can pour type metal into that. When the type metal sets, you've got a page of a table that's ready to be put into a printing press. Untouched by human hands and presumably error-free, because this machine's not supposed to make mistakes, theoretically. So that's sort of what Babbage has planned. Well, he spends a couple of years designing it, putting it on paper. He offers it to the British government, which says thanks, but no thanks. And he goes back to working on the analytic engine. Well, now we jump ahead to 1985. Big jump. The Science Museum in London has hired a new guy as curator of computing, a guy named Doran Swade. I just learned from right now it was Doran Swade, PhD. I don't know what the PhD was in. Anyway, Doran does believe that if Babbage had gotten some financial support, he could have built the engine and it would have worked. Again, I don't know about time scale, you know, how many hundreds of years it would take to build it, but nobody ever discusses that. At any rate, Doran did believe he could make the engine, build the engine. And there were other experts also who said no way, because everything was handmade in England at that time, no mass production. So the parts had pretty big tolerances, like a couple of thousandths of an inch. Now the design of this machine was different from his first machine. His first machine, everything sort of fit together. But in this machine you have things like a gear coming down and meshing with another gear, which means if they're not lined up, crash. So the other experts said, nah, it couldn't have worked because of the bad being handmade, be too sloppy to work. And Doran decides to prove his point by building the machine. So he starts raising money. He wrote a book, which is kind of a biography of Babbage, but the last chapter describes the process of raising the money, and there were several amusing episodes in this process of raising money. The one that amused me most was when he literally blackmailed 30,000 pounds out of IBM. Anyway, it amused me because there was a time when IBM was the enemy. Then Microsoft became the enemy, and one of these days Google will be the enemy.
Never.
Anyhow, where was I? So he raised the money, and he decided he had to build the machine honestly, or it wouldn't prove his point. So in the first place, they used that working model in the museum to make a decision as to what kinds of parts would be bronze. This is bronze, not brass. What kinds would be steel and what kinds would be cast iron. Just a general. Then the other point was that when parts were farmed out to companies on contract that had computer-controlled machinery to make the parts, they were specified to be made oversized, and they were finished by hand, by guys at the museum, with files, I guess. So the point is the tolerances of those parts matched what could have been done in Babbage's day. Well, they only raised enough money to build this much, but they were able to demonstrate it to the press on in 1991, on the day which was the 200th anniversary of Babbage's birth. Well, they didn't have money to build this. Second legend. Bill Gates sees the machine, and they obviously try to hit him up for the money to build that, or his foundation. Right, money. He declines, but he suggests that they get in touch with a guy named Nathan Myhrvold. Nathan had retired. He had been Microsoft's chief technical officer. So guys like that have a lot of money.
Can you say what the last name was again?
What?
Last name?
Myhrvold.
Myhrvold.
M-Y-H or M-H-Y-R-V-O-L-D.
Okay.
I have to check the spelling. Anyway. M-Y-H. Nathan's a kind of a weird guy. His living room's a bit of a museum. It's got a dinosaur skeleton in it, among other things. Well, anyway, there's a lot of email correspondence, as I heard the legend, and Nathan finally makes the museum an offer they can't refuse. He says, I will pay you to build 2 of these and 1 of these, because I want that machine in my living room. There's another bit of legend. We, once a month, lubricate this machine with lubricants, grease, and oil that are labeled as food-grade lubricants. What that means is it's legal in this country to use them on machinery that prepares food. I've looked at the labels, they're actually silicones, but I guess they're non-toxic. And the legend is that when Myhrvold's wife smelled the machine oil in London, she said, not in my living room. So, they started, a picture of Nathan. Here's the show it here. They started in 1980. Sorry, when did they start? I forgot the year, but anyway, it took him 6 years, and it never got to his living room, not yet anyway, because the chairman of our board of trustees, Len Shustek, persuaded him to lend it to us for 1 year. And it arrived at our front door in the spring of 2008. Around December, we asked for an extension, and we got a 1-year extension. And that's happened every damn year since. So, we don't know what the future brings, but until December 15th of 2012, we didn't know whether we'd have it in 2013. It's been like that. Now, one thing about Nathan, which is interesting, there's a part of this machine called a carry lever And I don't have a good picture of it, but this picture is good enough. It's the thing at the top of this picture. You see the cylindrical body and 3 arms coming out. One arm looks like a little anchor, one arm is curved, and then there's a long arm. Now the way those originally were made, the long arm was a separate piece which was brazed to the cylinder, which was a weak one. And if you looked at it too hard, it would break. And a lot of them broke because of some mistiming, misalignment, where 2 parts of the machine try to occupy the same space at the same time, and something gives way maybe, or the machine jams harmlessly, depending on what the parts are. Well, in this case, carry levers broke. And when we ran out of spare carry levers, Nathan heard about it and said, oh, that won't be a problem. There's a company that I just bought that can make them. And I couldn't believe it. They made them out of a solid piece of bronze. No brazing. A big piece of bronze, most of the metal chewed away, and here are these lovely little parts coming out. So, anyway, that's the story. So now I get to where I tell you what it does and how it does it. Okay. The results appear in this column here, counting down. In other words, the least significant digits at the bottom. We just read them off. There's a sort of an index mark. The machine wasn't intended to be read here. It was intended to print results, but there is an index mark and we can read it. The columns are numbered. This is column 0, column 1, column 2, through to column 7. The number in column 7 never changes. Now, we originally set up this machine. There's a way to set up, there's a way to do things with levers and crank to certain positions where you can actually turn these wheels by hand and set up whatever you want in them. Every column here has 31 wheels, so it takes about 20 minutes to set it up and check that you've set it up correctly. Now, what happens? Oh, now, one turn of this main shaft here produces one result. We call that a cycle. You may have heard me yell and do so many cycles. Now, no human being would be strong enough to turn this shaft. In the interest of authenticity, the crank can actually be mounted here. There's a mount. Babbage would have discovered that. So there's a 4-to-1 reduction here. So he turns the crank 4 times. That's one cycle, one turn of the shaft. Now the cycle gets divided into 2 half cycles. I'll tell you what happens in each half cycle. In the first half cycle, whatever number is in column 7 is added to the number in column 6. At the same time, this is all in parallel, the number in column 5 is added to column 4, and so on down the line. Odd-numbered columns are added to even-numbered columns that way. In the second half cycle, you probably have guessed it by now, the number in column 6 is added to that in column 5, and so on down the line. So the numbers in even-numbered columns are added to the numbers in odd-numbered columns. And by some magic, what you wind up with in column 0 is the next value of the polynomial. Which I'll just have to explain that in the blackboard. That's how it works. Now, I'll tell you how it ends. Flashlight. No, laser pointer. Oh, I didn't bring my laser pointer. Oh, damn. Well, I'll have to use the flashlight, sorry. Unless you have a laser pointer with you. No, sir. No, it's not okay. Okay. I'll talk about these 2 columns, okay? We're going to add the number in this column to the number in this column. Between those 2 columns is a column called a second. And people on that side of me will see that the gear, gee, this works as well as a laser pointer. The gear is kind of thick. It's about a 1/2 inch high. But people on the other side will see that it's very thin. This shaft and the teeth are way over here, but you'll see it's just about 1/8 of an inch. And that's important. That difference is important. Well, here's what happens. Every number goes 4 times around. 0 through 9, 0 through 9, 4 times. Actually, if they only went once, they'd be very fat numbers. There'd be big gaps between them. So anyway, 4 times around. There's a rod inside this column that goes the whole length of the machine. Every wheel has 4 bumps on the inside, 4 projections. The rod has 4 fingers that can line up with those projections. The rod can move up and down and it can rotate. Well, the rod comes down so that the fingers line up with those bumps. And then the rod rotates. And what it does is it sets each individual wheel here to 0. So a wheel which has a 9 against the index mark moves a long way, and a wheel which has 0 doesn't move at all. Now, these teeth are engaged to these teeth, are engaged to these teeth, and so the number in each wheel is added to the number in the corresponding wheel over here. And that's the addition process, except for what I've left out. Anybody can guess what I've left out? Carry. Someone said carry? Right. If when we're doing this add, this wheel hits 0 or goes beyond 0, we have to make a note, we got to add 1 to the wheel above. And if the wheel above had a 9 in it, it'll be kicked over to 0. We have to add 1 to the wheel above that. And all that magic is done by this thing called the carry lever that I talked about, which is at the back of the machine. And everything but its long arm is not very visible because it's sort of buried in the works. So I'll have to sort of explain that with my hands. But before I explain about the carry, we've got to do something because this column now has all zeros. We've lost the data. But the data is sort of hidden here. So this whole column goes up a little bit, and the thin gear disengages. So it no longer affects these. And now if this is reset to its original position, it puts the number back in here. Now while that is going on, the ones on the outside are in a third position where the thick and thin gears are disengaged, so they can't interfere with what we're trying to do here. So when he next cranks the machine, watch one of these sectors, and you'll see it'll go up one, go up another, and then drop back down. And then if you watch adjacent sectors, you'll see that the even-numbered ones and odd-numbered ones are out of phase with each other. And there's one more part of the machine to watch for, and it's the part that makes most of the bracket. You see this here? It goes, it's like a thin, we'll call it a sword. It goes the whole length of the machine. And what it does is, after the addition takes place, it comes slamming in and out to all the teeth, and it lines all those wheels up perfectly. It digitizes it. And one of the ways this machine can jam is if things get so out of alignment